Hi, I'm Christopher Sabat. I'm the voice of Vegeta, Piccolo, Yamcha, and others on Dragon Ball Z. I'm here at Webfoot Technologies to find out how they can make a huge show like Dragon Ball Z into a tiny little Game Boy Advance game. Follow me. I'll take you behind the scenes for a look at the making of the legacy of Goku 2. Here we go.
Webfoot is extremely excited to make Dragon Ball Z into a video game. It's such a great show, and it really deserves to be a great video game. So we're working our hardest to do the best that we can, and we think that the fans will be pleased with Legacy of Goku
2. We started initially with a concept document about where we wanted to go with this part of the storyline, which covers the Trunks saga, the Android saga, and the Cell saga. We write up this short document, essentially detailing what we want to do with it. And once that gets approved, we move into the design process. We spent several weeks on this, and we essentially come up with all of the elements of gameplay, what we want to do that makes this different and original, how we're going to treat the elements of the storyline to create the best possible result. The brainstorming process starts with us huddling in the conference room for days and days and days. We do extensive research on the series. We're already fans and familiar with it, but it's important for us to go back through and watch the episodes that are going to be relevant to the game and pick out what parts we want to represent in the game. We obviously can't cover everything because the game would be 200 hours long, but we pick out what we think is the most important and we go with that. We spend a lot of time writing a lot of stuff up on the chalkboard, you know, what kind of enemies we want, what kind of areas in the show we're going to visit. We watch a lot of videos to make sure we're on the right track and not diverging. But for the most part, we stayed, I think, very, very true to the series, and I think that's going to be reflected in the game. Turning these characters from Dragon Ball Z into tiny little munchkins on the Game Boy Advance is kind of an interesting process. We want them to be recognizable as who they are, but we don't have a lot of space to work with, so we end up giving them big heads, big hair. It's a tradition in Japanese RPGs that works really well, and so we went with this method. We hand off these things to Mandy Paul, who is an excellent sprite character animator, and she begins creating the animation sheets for our little characters.
For the Legacy of Goku games, my job was to draw the characters. I pretty much drew almost every character that you see in the game, although I had a bit of help, so I can't claim all the credit. But from the start, they basically handed me character sketches or screenshots straight from the show or any other sort of reference materials, action figures, anything, and said, here, draw these characters doing these moves, and I took it and went. I've got Goku up here just as an example. You can see this pink box around him is pretty much the limits of where I can draw. He has to fit inside this box, which is why his hair had to fit inside this box along with everything else. So you can see basically the drawing of the character starts out pretty much with eyes. That's where I start with. I determine how tall the character is going to be, his basic form, you know, how big his head will be. The heads are always really big on sprites along with the eyes because you just need to be able to see their facial expressions. You're not going to be able to see that unless you blow it up really big because the sprites are so small and the screen is so tiny. So once I get the basic form for the character, I fill it out, make it asymmetrical so it's a little not so well, symmetrical. Basically, I just fill it in, start putting colors and start shading it out and making it look solid. To make him look surprised is really just a matter of changing a few pixels in his eyes to make his eyes, the pupils look smaller and white around the eyes look bigger. And all of a sudden, he looks like his eyes are really wide. Even though the actual size of the eyes hasn't changed, I just moved a few pixels around. And then Vegeta got the extra eyebrows here to make him look a little more angry because, well, Vegeta's always angry at something, I think. I give everyone a separate sheet and try to give them their own personalities. Okay, so I did Super Saiyan on one sheet along with his regular, so you can, maybe I can zoom in on here and you can see him walking along. The walks are all 4-frame animations, mostly for space, versus appearance. You can do a decent walk in, well, you can do a walk in 2 frames or 3 frames. We chose 4 frames to make the walk look as good as possible without wasting too many frames, since unfortunately memory is an issue. And the Game Boy Advance can only hold so much of this, so you have to pare it down.
Jim did a lot of the integration of the sprites, character sprites, into the game. He was sort of a jack of all trades, actually. He did a lot of the lighting for our indoor levels. He did a lot of level building and design. Essentially any art task that popped up, he took them up.
Mostly I will take character art from Mandy and do the animations for it. I will do the run animations, punching, kicking, jumping, dying. Any animation that's required for a particular character, I will take her art and adapt it to that animation. Like, for example, here's Perfect Cell. And this is the kind of art I usually get from Mandy. It has the front, the back, and the sides. We only have the left side because for the right side, of course, you can just flip the picture around. The actual size of the character is actually more like this. You can see he's only like ½ an inch tall. But still, when we're actually working on the character, we want to work on him when he's like about that big, because even though the person won't be able to see every tiny detail, it'll still come out. Someone will look at that and say, wow, that's really detailed and it looks really good. They won't know exactly why it looks really good, but you want to make sure you get it down to like the smallest detail you possibly can. This is the Tiger Bandit. He's one of the first enemies you encounter in the game. And again, this is the kind of art I will get from Mandy, just a standard standing pose. And then I will take it and, like, for instance, here's the punch animation. And you can see, again, goes punch from the front, punch from the back, punch from the side, and I'll also have the run. And you can see a lot of the, like the face will just be duplicated in each one, but changed slightly. And I'll move the legs back and forth for each frame. Here's a little grenade lob animation that the tiger does. So once we get all these done, you can actually take it into the game. See, it's like one of the very first enemies you encounter. There he is. You can see him doing his little grenade throwing animation. The grenade is actually added in after the animation it's done. It's a completely separate piece of art. And you can see that the punch is the same on both sides, just flipped over. Here's the grenade lob animation. So another artist, I think Andrew did this. Andrew keyed in the grenade for each one of these frames to make sure that it would be in the proper place so that it wouldn't be floating above his hand or something like that.
My main tool is Adobe Photoshop, which is what I'm using right now. What I'll usually do is after I've got some reference shots, I'll make an initial sketch, and this sketch is usually done in this light blue color so that it becomes really easy to then make a more detailed sketch on top of that. So for instance, if I were to show some of these concept sketches for different monsters from the show, I started initially with these light blue outline sketches, and these could be easily manipulated and can go through lots of different versions before we would get to a version that we all like the best and that the people over in Japan would accept. Once that was done, I would go in and create a more clean version with a black outline that could be then used to create all of the coloring. Now, of course, the monsters that we have in the game are so small on the screen and are going to be animated and end up being pretty different from the original concept artwork. But this artwork is used to give the other artists a guideline as for the style of art that we want to be sticking with, and how we want the monsters to animate and what their emotional impact should be on the visual quality of the game. This is right here an overview of our world map, and in the actual game that you play, you won't be able to see it like this. It's actually going to be in this perspective view as in kind of a 3D. It kind of looks 3D, and you can fly over it, and so it's a more realistic view of the world as if you're actually flying over a planet. So this is a really detailed image that we have of this world that again, I was trying really hard to be as close as I could to the actual layout that they do for the world of Dragon Ball Z. So we had a lot of reference of the world from the DBZ encyclopedia that we took a look at, and I found a lot of other miscellaneous sketches of the world that they had made over in Japan, and I tried to take into account both their version of the world and then the way some of our environments in our areas are, and to try to get a good mix of the two so that our world could seem like it both fits within the actual Dragon Ball Z world and also fits with our game. So we've got all these different areas down here, like this area over here. It's kind of hard to tell because it's small, but this is Goku's house, and if I move over, we've got all these mountains and grass and desert. And there are a lot of areas in here that actually aren't going to be accessible in the game, but I put them in there anyway because they exist within the world. And so not only would that help to make the world seem really detailed and full, but then there could be areas where even if you don't go there, the player might recognize that area and just get excited about the fact that we included it in there. One of my other primary objectives for this game was to create a lot of the initial concept artwork for the environments as well as the characters. So for instance, a lot of the areas will have a lot of cliffs all over the place, and so one of the things that I had to do was design the cliffs. Just like when I was working with the world map, I had a limitation that I had to deal with, but it's a little bit more strict with the environment. I would have to make sure that the graphics that I've made are going to be able to be used in a interesting fashion, in lots of different combinations, and also in lots of different terrains. Because cliffs could show up in the forest, cliffs can show up in the desert, cliffs can show up anywhere. They might have snow on the cliffs. So, for instance, I would make this initial painting, and this painting is a really high-resolution version of these cliffs, and I just tried to get as many different kinds of cliff angles and lighting and all of the different important things that would go into the artwork of the cliff, all in one big piece. That was then given to Murray, and Murray, his job was to then, in this case, was to then take that cliff that I had made and make all these different versions of it. So here, the cliff has been broken up into pieces, and those pieces can be repeated over and over again to make taller cliffs or longer cliffs, or just cliffs that are a lot more complicated and not flat looking. And we'd have cliffs that have grass tops, and we have cliffs that have a dark bottom and cliffs that have a light bottom. And if I'm going to piece together an interesting cliff from some of these pieces of the cliff, I could take this piece. Let's see here, I'll start a new image, and I'll grab a bunch of these cliffs. I'm gonna make a cliff out of this. So if I'm gonna make an interesting cliff, I can grab this centerpiece and repeat it over and over again. Okay, now I want an angle on the side. So I just stick it down. Now I've suddenly got some angles. If I want to continue the straight side across again, I can just grab one of these side pieces and plop it right next to it, and it's done. This is tile-based level design, and the whole point is that we're creating tiles that will easily connect with each other to look like it's no longer made of tiles, so that we can do a lot of the work up front in creating the artwork, and then later on all we have to do is be creative about how they're placed down, and we don't have to worry about whether or not it's going to look right. And that speeds up a lot of the creation process of making the levels, and it allows us to make a lot more unique levels in a shorter amount of time than would have otherwise been necessary.
When we're thinking about how we're going to translate the story from the series into the game, a lot of editing takes place, a lot of video watching takes place. Jerry Swanson was responsible for creating both original dialogue and taking this dialogue from the show and editing it down into something that will work well with our game. There's a lot of reading in this game. We wanted to cover the story as well as we could, but the dialogue from the show, obviously there's a lot of talking, and it has to get cut down into something that players can understand and will help the game move along at a good pace. So that was a real challenge right there.
The show has a lot of dialogue, so it's not something that we can fit in a video game, and also we can't have any voice acting in this game, so we have to have it all going through text, and we can't expect the player to be reading just page after page after page, considering it breaks up the flow of the game. We try to get the dialogue down to its basic core, and we want it to be as short as possible, but at the same time we want it to have all the character of the original dialogue, and we want it to have all the details that are necessary to get the story across. One of the big things that we were trying to do was make it so that someone who has never watched Dragon Ball Z can get a sense of what the story is and who these characters are.
For the music of Legacy of Goku 2, we definitely wanted to take the approach, again, of being as true to the show as possible. We listened to a lot of music. Giannis Brown was our primary musician. Paul Carmody also did music for the game, and they both worked on sound effects. We were very careful to do a faithful translation of the show's music into something that will fit onto the Game Boy Advance cartridge and sound reasonably similar. It's tough to make really lush sounding music on the Game Boy Advance. I think they did a very good job in this case of translating those songs into something that sounds good on the Game Boy Advance.
For this game, our goal was to make it sound like the show, so Giannis and I both would listen to the music from the show extensively, and actually write it down note for note, and go from there. I mean, a lot of the cues on the show are maybe only like 30 seconds, so we have to turn that 30 seconds into, a 6-minute song. So that was the biggest challenge. But, like I said, the goal in this game was to really try to recreate the sounds of the show rather than just some generic video game music. We use a bank of samples that are made by ourselves. We would use a program like SoundForge just to make very short wave files and turn them into audio samples. They would sound all sorts of sounds. We have about 100 samples in this game, and we managed to fit them all into a really small file size. So we had a huge library of sounds to work with. And then with Impulse Tracker, with this kind of specialized music called tracker music, you would write down the note value you would want played. And you can, it specifies the instrument. You can also specify the volume that you want it played at, and the panning and vibrato and sliding and all this great stuff you can do with it. So he has a hi-hat track going on this here. The next one. It doesn't sound like much, but you play it all together. It actually fills up pretty nicely. Yeah, I mean, we couldn't possibly use CD audio because, let's say you had a 4-minute song. If you were playing a PlayStation 2 game, you did CD audio. It wouldn't matter. You got the whole disc to fit this thing because a 4-minute song is going to be over 40 megabytes. If it was an MP3, it'd be around 4 megabytes, which using a PC or something, that's good. But a GBA cartridge, they only have about a total, they usually average around 8 megabytes. So there's no way you're going to fit a 4 megabyte song in there. You'd use up all your space. So you got to find some way to really crunch things down, and tracker music is one of the most logical choices.
I'm very excited to be working on Legacy of Goku 2.
I've watched Dragon Ball Z since the very beginning of the Saiyan saga with Vegeta. So being able to create a game based on this show that I've watched for years is just like a dream come true. It's really awesome.
It's been amazing working on this, to be such a large product, something that's so popular, and to actually be able to work on the Game Boy Advance, and to make something like this on a computer and then play it on a Game Boy and see it in action is just, it's just amazing.
I was a Dragon Ball Z fan since it first started playing on Cartoon Network, and so being given the opportunity to have input into part of the Dragon Ball Z universe has been a real joy.
It is exciting because, you know, more people will hear this music than would ever hear the stuff I used to write in college and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, that was amazing. Now that you know how they make it, go out and play it, live it, and love it. I'll see you on Dragon Ball Z.